much the case. And it also really shifted things for us from like lots of advice. So at the time, there was sort of advice about whether you should be a CIC or this and that, and how to different ways to kind of access properties, which started to get quite overwhelming. But actually having those practical things in place around the funding and the commitment and the prioritization of social enterprises and organizations like ours kind of created an environment where we could take a little bit more risk. And so we've benefited massively from that. And then in terms of sort of our relationship with Plymouth City Council, they've sort of supported us on and off along the way. But very much, I'm kind of interested in how we can sort of talk about relationships with local authorities in a way that sort of really shifts the balance of trust and power. So quite often you kind of hear, or certainly what started us on our journey was people saying, why doesn't anyone do anything about these empty buildings? And the they was generally Plymouth City Council. And so we were kind of thinking, well, why don't we do something about these empty buildings? And I think that's some of the tension sometimes between a community business and a local authority, is that there's this sense that like communities are just going to come and need things from a local authority and need money, need resources and all of that. And of course we do. There's different ways to access that, and actually a local authority coming alongside you and being sort of, you know, the power to your elbow rather than necessarily the place where you go for that sort of direct support, kind of strengthens both parties, I think. So I'm really interested in how we can kind of grow that sort of conversation in a more positive and a more trusting way. And we've made steps towards that, certainly in Plymouth, and Anna will share that a little bit in a minute. In terms of like practically how we've had support from the council, we first of all benefited from the Social Enterprise Investment Fund, which was a 0% fund that the council set up in response really to the social enterprise city and the sort of recognition that more social enterprises in the city would support the local economy in a more sort of resilient and progressive way. So we benefited from that, which was a loan grant facility. And then there's the City Change Fund in Plymouth as well, which enables the council to pledge on crowdfunder. So they were able to invest in our community share offer. So they're one of our investors, which is a really great relationship to have in terms of you know, making sure that they're rewarded for their investment in lots of different ways, so financially as well as being involved as a shareholder. And then critically, at the point when we were ready to buy the Clipper, which was our first building, they were able to offer us a loan because we were creating 2 homes above the Clipper. And so that was key to assembling the short-term finance to be able to buy that building. So there's been a number of kind of key points where they've been able to sort of dive in and really give us that sort of push on to what we're trying to achieve. And we're really keen to have sort of discussions with you and to sort of listen to Anna to think about how that could be replicated around the country, about how we can share more about the things that are really working and creating the environment for community businesses to thrive. So I'll hand over to Anna, and then we'll open up the floor for discussion.
Thanks, Hannah. When Hannah and I talked about, you know, what we were going to say today, the thing that struck me was that I could reel off the list of activities that the council has put in place, or policies that the council has put in place that have helped organisations like Nudge to own and develop assets. But I know from being on the other side that it's not necessarily useful to know that, you know, Plymouth has got this community asset transfer policy that means that it makes it easier for us to transfer corporate assets for community use, because knowing that kind of policy is useful doesn't help you to replicate it in your local area. It might give you an idea of the end goal, but actually it might not be an end goal that's suitable for you or your local area. You might be starting from a different place. So as we were talking through what we were going to say today, it occurred to me that the big thing for me that has made a difference has been the relationships with people like Hannah and Wendy, and with Hannah and Wendy in particular, because they've been very willing to engage with us, just as I've been very willing to engage with them. And that engagement has, sometimes it's been a warts and all kind of conversation, and not everybody will do that with us. So that kind of willingness to engage is one thing, but then the willingness to listen and understand on both sides requires quite a lot of resilience, and I see a lot of resilience in Hannah and Wendy. There's that willingness to demonstrate the anger that we're all feeling about the things that aren't quite working, and the things that we want to change, and the things that we want to see prioritised that keep slipping down the agenda. We have quite a lot of those conversations, don't we, Hannah? So I would say, number one, the thing that a local authority can do is to engage with you, and that you engage with them, and that you build a relationship where you can have those kinds of frank conversations, because it's that listening that leads to the understanding of what are the challenges for you and what are the challenges for me in supporting you. That understanding on both sides. And out of that, I think there's a relationship that has grown in Plymouth, where I've got quite a few organisations that I can say, well, we'd really like to see you doing X, Y, and Z. And that starts a conversation that might go in a completely different direction. So, for example, we've been saying to some of our community asset owners recently about could we develop community asset growth policies with you? Could we identify the assets in the communities that each organisation focuses on, and look at what could they be used for? What does that community need? How could that support? In our case, we're particularly interested in inclusive economic growth, and that means bringing businesses to the local area, creating jobs in the local area, but also making sure that they're engaging with people around the economic challenges, or the challenges that they face in participating in the economy, in getting and retaining jobs. And that might be things as straightforward as childcare. Is there enough childcare in the area? Is it a quality childcare? How can we support those childcare organisations? Are they in the right places? It's that kind of community development that we're kind of not afraid to get involved in those conversations, even if they're quite difficult to do something about. I know that perhaps over several years we might get opportunities, funding will come along, and we can make sure that there are levers in there to try and address some of the challenges that the people are finding in their local environments. So I just want to leave you really with a couple of things to think about, that there are some levers that you can pull once you've got that relationship going with somebody in your local authority, there are some levers that you can pull. So one is to make sure that there is understanding there, that the kind of skills and the understanding is there, and sometimes that's just about getting people out to visit you, have a cup of tea together, all that kind of basic stuff. But then there are some key policies, I think, and understanding which policies are driving change. So, for example, in Plymouth, we've got a new administration that gained power in May. They've updated our corporate plan. There are some key changes in there. For example, there's changes in terminology. We've gone from Labour to Conservative. The Conservatives are talking about Build Back Better, whereas Labour were talking about inclusive growth. The Conservatives are talking about community ownership, whereas Labour were talking about cooperative ownership. Conservatives are talking about disparities in communities and between communities, whereas Labour were talking about inequalities. So it's things like that are really important to pick up on that terminology and look at the way that it's kind of driving change in the local authorities. One of the other kind of levers that I pull quite often is around data, making sure that the data is visible, and there's so much data around disparities in communities, but understanding which ones are really shocking and highlighting that and using that to underpin the case for engaging and changing and finding opportunity, finding money to support your organisations. It all comes from the data, and if you can find those kind of nuggets of shocking statistics, then that really helps. So things like Public Health England, it's very good for that. They've got a data framework. NOMIS, which is the Office for National Statistics, Labour survey information will tell you how many unemployed people there are, where they are, whether it's higher for men or women or young people or older people. That kind of data can really help to get you heard and listened to and understood. And then the other thing is about the way that councils spend money. So I think there is increasing frustration about the use of the social value policy in procurement. But that has led to some changes and some kind of new mechanisms for making sure that when we buy things, we are asking for particular outcomes, and those outcomes might be engagement with organisations like you. If we're building something, can we get the construction company to engage with the community ownership sector? Can we get them to advise, mentor, provide trainees or apprentices to work with you on projects? All of those kinds of things can be written into specifications, particularly if they're multi-million-pound projects. That kind of stuff should come as standard, and it's something that once you've got that good relationship with local authorities, you can ask for. But you need to know that the projects are coming up and how they're procured. So I would say that those are the three big things that I would encourage you to look at. So they are policy. What's the policy saying? How's it changing? How does it benefit you? The data, how can you use the data, kind of really wave the flag and demonstrate the kind of benefits of supporting your organisation, and spend, really find ways to leverage that social value in procurements, particularly big procurements. If the local authority has got any control at all over new developments, there should be community benefit in it, and you should be at the forefront of that. So I'm just going to leave you. I'm going to put in the chat a link to a report that we wrote recently. It was actually aimed at cooperative development, but a lot of what I've said and some of the examples of how councils can work with community asset ownership organisations is in there. And I would, replace cooperative with community asset ownership, because obviously your structures can be kind of all sorts of different kinds, and it does say that in the report. So the report is essentially about empowering local organisations and local communities to kind of develop from the grassroots. So do come back to me if you've got any kind of questions. I'll put my email address and phone number in the chat as well. I'd be delighted to hear from you. But hopefully we can have a good old discussion now as well.
Yeah.
Go back to Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. So it would be really great to hear from some of you if you've got any questions or any thoughts around how to sort of work with local authorities.
Can I speak, Hannah, please?
Yeah, go for it. Yes, of course.
Morning. So I'm Jane. I'm from the scrap store here in Plymouth, and it's really interesting hearing Anna talk about things that may be potentially in the pipeline and ways of developing opportunities here in Plymouth, because actually that's how we started. As what was originally the Plymouth Play Association, we were part of an exit strategy from Plymouth City Council. Looking back, for any of you who are old enough to remember things like single regeneration budgets, rounds 1 to 5, we were part of round 1, and we had money from the local authority, who I was working for at the time, to set up resources to help childcare facilities have what they needed to build up more childcare in areas where there was particularly women wanting to return to work. So that relationship was there. It helped us set up in the beginning, and here 27 years later we're still here in a different building, in a slightly different place. But the reason why I'm here this morning is to find out more about buildings and opportunities, because our landlord is about to change the building that we're in over the next couple of years, and we'll be looking for a new space. So we're quite excited, also very daunted by the prospect, and looking for a new home. So very interested to hear what's going on with other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Is there anyone else with a sort of question, or they want to sort of share their experience? Simon?
Yeah, so I'm working quite a sort of similar part of the council. So I'm working at Oxford City Council in a role that's sort of focused on community wealth building, so within the local economic development team. I'd be really interested, I know we're sort of not going too much down the sort of policy line, but I'm very interested in understanding sort of how proactive Plymouth are in terms of identifying opportunities within their own asset base. So within Oxford, actually the City Council is a very big property owner in the area, but there's a lot of so there's some commercial pressures on that. We tend, there are sort of divergent objectives corporately in terms of revenue generation versus sort of stimulating and enabling sort of community ownership or community use of assets. And I just sort of wonder whether Plymouth are taking a sort of proactive approach to that. Are you trying to match people up? Are you publishing information on what the opportunities might be? Or yeah, just curious to hear more, really.
Yes, so I got involved with it through actually one of our councillors, one of our portfolio holders under the last administration, who really championed it. So whenever he heard of an organisation that was looking for new premises, he wanted to know what premises does the council own that we could use for them. And he was also the person who championed the funding that often helped with doing up premises, or at least leveraging further funding. And I think part of that intervention was to ask for a list of corporate property that was owned, that was run by or long leased by community organisations. And in particular, we started to look at where the rents were subsidised and where they weren't subsidised, and how that was working, and how we could help it to work better. So from an economic development point of view, we became much more interested in whether the organisations taking on properties had a strong business plan. Did they know that they were going to be able to afford the liabilities on the lease? And that's kind of where we are now. So there are all sorts of different parts of the council that get involved in community organisations who want to run and take on properties. Sports, arts, the parks and green spaces. There's a kind of low carbon team that we're really interested in. Could they put solar panels on roofs and that kind of stuff? And they developed as a community organisation. So what we found was actually that there were people right across the council. We have a land and property department, and part of my job was to say, look, we'll help you with this. We'll engage with these organisations. We'll help you on the community social enterprise development side, if you kind of do the property side of it, because they were actually quite snowed under with that. I think some of the support needs of startup community organisations can be quite overwhelming for somebody like essentially they're surveyors in the land and property team. So it really helped that we were able to intervene in that way. So yes, we've kind of done quite a few things. We've got a list. We've engaged colleagues. I've learned a lot from those conversations that I've had with Hannah and Wendy and other people like them about how it works in practice. And obviously, the nudge properties, they weren't transferred from the council. Nudge have kind of gone into Union Street and said, these are a load of privately owned properties and we want them. So we facilitated that in quite a different way. Hope that answers your question.
No, that's really interesting. And just so I'm clear, sorry, one final point on it. There is a sort of an overarching sort of policy strategy objective to facilitate these things. It's that sort of sits somewhere in the council's sort of strategic framework.
Assets to community leases. Yes, I'll put the link in the
that'd be great.
Chat.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
I think it's been an interesting sort of process as well about where an organisation gets their support from as well, so that they can present in the sort of strongest possible way when they're starting to kind of negotiate or talk to the council about taking on an asset. I think it's kind of it's worth enabling them to sort of access other support before they do that, so they come in a really strong way. And we've been looking at sort of opportunities to either mentor or to kind of share information of that sort of earlier part of the journey, because what happens as well is I guess because we've come at it from a private sector point of view, we didn't have to do a business plan to buy our building. We weren't asked whether we could pay the mortgage. We had to kind of demonstrate we had a route to it, but it was quite a different level of information. And now that we've started to kind of do joint ventures with private investors, that's how they also operate. And actually, you know, kind of reflecting on that, the sort of asks for a private developer when they approach the council with a potential project are very different to a community organisation. And that's because, you know, people in the council care. They don't want a community organisation to fall over or take on an asset that they can't manage. But also it can establish like a environment where things become quite risk averse. So we're really interested in how we can support people to sort of to maybe challenge that a bit as well. Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question? Or
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Rachel. I'll go after you.
Okay. Well, I'm also from a council, a local authority, so I don't know if one of the community people would like to speak first.
I'm also from local authority perspective. So.
All right. Well, my question for Alison, sorry, for Anna, is you just said at the end there that you've facilitated access to private properties. I just wondered how you've done that.
Well, I think that's probably more Hannah's area than mine. So we have a policy in our strategic plan for regenerating Union Street. And I know Hannah and Wendy have used that to demonstrate the strategic case for what they're doing on Union Street. And then, you know, just things really like making sure that they've got access to some of our senior managers. It's sometimes been quite hard, hasn't it, Hannah, to get in the door and start waving the flag. But we've been trying for several years, and it has got easier, I think. The conversations have got more positive and more trusting. You know, it started off as a bit of a, you know, we've been trying to do things with Union Street for years and it hasn't worked, and is it really going to change? And I think over the last couple of years, Wendy and Hannah have demonstrated that, you know, they're negotiating those deals very well. They're engaging those landlords very well. They're actually demonstrating some really good results. And all I do really is wave the flag for them and say, look at what they're doing. They got really sound business processes. They're a very investable organisation. You know, when we look at how we can support them and we get grant applications from Nudge, I know that the finances that they put forward and the plans that they put forward, the business plans that they write, are going to be good. They've thought through eventualities. They are a very investable proposition. And, you know, Hannah and Wendy, you know, didn't need help from me to do that, but other organisations do need help from our teams to do that. They need to understand what a good proposition looks like and how to make sure that they demonstrate the strategic fit for the council, so that it's all about getting up the agenda, isn't it? It's about making sure that those senior managers or the members or whatever can see that that there's a door there, even if it's not open yet. There's a door there that can be knocked on, that we've got everything in place to support this particular initiative. And sometimes that's excuse me, sometimes from my point of view, that's about finding the jigsaw pieces and putting them together on Hannah and Wendy's behalf and presenting them to senior managers, saying, you know, here it is, it's there. You know, they've done the work. All I'm doing really is, you know, a bit of a magpie dropping pieces of shiny paper in the right nest and saying, look at this. So it's all down to Hannah and Wendy, really. I think all I really do is, like I say, wave the flag.
Yeah, I think things are unlocking a lot more now, aren't they? So we had a lot of kind of, like Anna said, a sort of pushback, especially in the first few years, which was interesting because we'd had a loan from the council to buy the clipper. So that was kind of 80% of the the value of the purchase, and we needed to pay that back within 12 months. And no one else had ever paid this fund back properly. And so it was really important for us to demonstrate that we could do that. And I think we would have pretty much done anything to pay that back on time and show that we could be trusted in that way. And so I think that there has been sort of key moments like that, but then also moments where when we weren't being sort of taken seriously by our councillors or by sort of different departments in the council, it has held us back in some ways, particularly where they sort of prioritise the inward investment type story and don't recognise that there could be another local story, which is what Anna's really advocating for now. And actually the pandemic has really helped to sort of raise the profile of that and the opportunities around that. But that's been quite challenging, I think, particularly around sort of, you know, the sort of larger government grants and things like that. It's like, how do we get taken seriously? And I did have a meeting with one of the senior managers in the council a few months ago, which really sort of started to kind of shift the kind of conversations that we were having. And he was like, why aren't you coming to us as a major landowner? Why are you coming to us as a community organisation? And so there's also, I think, a responsibility for community businesses to actually really think about how they're coming to the council and how that might be perceived. And so yeah, we're kind of keen to sort of support others to sort of think in that way, because you kind of automatically sort of approach the council with that sort of paternalistic structure already in place, almost inadvertently. It's not really intended, I don't think, on any side, but it sort of inadvertently plays out. And so it's like how you can kind of tool up your community organisations to come at it in a way where someone in land and property would be more open and receptive and understand what they're trying to do. So I think there is a sort of a bit of a language barrier there as well. Sarah, did you want to come in?
Yes, thanks. So I work with the Greater London Authority, and we work in partnership with Newham Council to regenerate an area called the Royal Docks in Newham. And I work as a community relations manager, so I don't work on inclusive economy per se, but there is a community organisation that is looking to transform their community hall and community foundation, an asset that they have, into a housing development association. They're working with some architects and they've put forward a plan to build new housing for the local area. They've done lots of engagement with the local people and the local neighbourhood, and they're now in a position where they want to investigate new organisational models for themselves to be able to support community enterprises as their role in the area really transforms and grows and becomes much more than being a community foundation or community organisation, but to being a really active player in the regeneration of that particular neighbourhood and the area. And I really want to support them to do that, but I don't work in Newham Council, and there is a community wealth building policy in Newham, which is great, but they're not quite at the place to have, I think, the types of policies that you have to support specifically community businesses to develop and grow and have the particular, support mechanisms in place. We do have some funding that they can apply to called good growth funding, but they're probably just not quite big enough yet to apply for these large pots of transformative money. We might be able to find a way to give them funding, but I'd like to find other ways of supporting them to figure out, what are the different organizational models they can look at? What are the options available to them? How do they go about transforming their business model? And I wondered if you have any tools and resources or, other advice for other ways I could support them to do that.
I've just put a link in the chat for you. So the Cooperative Councils Network that we did our report for also did a community-led housing commission. And there's a website, an interactive website with all sorts of tools on there. So I think everything you find will be on there. I think it was led by Croydon, so it might be that the people are still around and you can even, you know, meet up or something modern. But I think the thing about housing is that there are two different approaches. You can either own the land and effectively kind of engage another organisation to develop it and run the housing, or you can develop as a housing provider yourself. But the amount of regulation around social housing is huge, so I would expect that they might be better to go the route of finding a partner who they can do it with, but make sure that they, you know, they are owning or retaining ownership of the land. It's very basic, and maybe even retaining, you know, running of community facilities or things like that out of it, but make sure there's an income stream out of the deal. That to me, that would be the key, would be to identify what are the options for getting an income stream out of that deal. There might be things in that report. It might be a case of you know, ringing everybody who's in there and asking them what, you know, what are the options for a community organisation that owns land to get an income stream, because then obviously they can use that income stream as leverage to get more funding or to you know, do the things that the local community needs.
I was just looking, Sarah, for a link to some research that we've had done recently. So we're looking at establishing a land exchange, so the ability to acquire other properties potentially for other people to eventually take ownership of and things like that. So it's to sort of like facilitate the process. And as part of that, we had shared assets, like look at some different models and examples from not just in the UK, but things that were deliverable within sort of current you know, legislation and stuff. So I'll dig it out and I'll share it with you, because that's quite useful. It's got like your classics like Coin Street and stuff like that on it, but it's got some others. But what's useful about it is it kind of says this is a limited company, this one is a community benefit society and stuff like that. So if they're looking at or whether they've got a group of companies, which is kind of sort of what we're starting to drift towards, is like actually you start to need like multiple entities to manage things in different ways, your ownership or potentially a joint venture and things like that. So I'll find it and I'll make sure that I get that to you.
Brilliant, thanks so much. I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
It sounds a really good project.
Yeah, it's really exciting actually, and you know, and it's great to see that other people have been doing it, and you know, there's lots to learn from.
And it's possible.
Yeah. I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Is that's kind of our thinking with the land exchange, is that actually, like, you go on this journey, and for most people or most groups, they're looking for a building for a specific end use, and then they might spend sort of 2 years or more kind of figuring out how to get this building and then getting it into use, when actually they want to do the end bit. They want to get on with doing their brilliant stuff in the building. And so I think it's interesting to think how, and so what happens with that is they have all that learning, and then there's no appetite to repeat that process again. They're quite happy in their building. And I think there's better ways that potentially we could reflect on those journeys and start to think, well, what were the barriers for that group? And therefore next time, how can we reduce those? And so that's certainly our thinking with the land exchange, is that, you know, we're sort of inundated with people going, oh, I want a building on Union Street as well, and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z with it. And it's like, well, actually, it's like, you know, at least really 3 years on that journey until, you're even going to stand a chance, and then potentially you're taking on a building that needs lots of investment or a new development or whatever it is. And so I think there is a question mark there about who does that bit of the process, and then who manages the end users, and how that could work better for local authorities and communities.
Brilliant, thank you.
We've just got a few minutes left, so is there anyone else with like a final question or thought?
I'll come in quickly. I'm Natalie, so I work for Power to Change. So yeah, we've obviously been doing quite a bit in Plymouth, as Hannah's already mentioned. And yeah, so I guess I just had a question for you, Hannah, in terms of how an organisation / funder like Power to Change can help build community business capacity to engage with local authorities, what the role can be there. From your experience.
Yeah, so well, certainly, like I guess kind of about a year and a half or so, and we were really kind of finding it quite tricky. Some of the senior people in Power to Change offered to come and meet people that were sort of like senior equivalents in the council, and they came and did like a REBA talk as well. So they were able to add, I guess, a kind of different voice, a more independent voice on what was possible, and to kind of bring in the examples from around the country where that was also happening. So I think that was really useful, and we've done that several times. So it's certainly, for those of you from a local authority, it's worth asking your community organisations if they have connections like that. So like Co-ops UK have come to tricky meetings with us before as well. And then it's just someone there that has like a whole other wealth of experience and credibility that sort of create a different setting, especially if you know as a local authority that there might be people around the table that aren't very receptive to what's being proposed. That kind of added, Francis has done it for us as well, the New Economics Foundation. It just gives a different level of credibility to how you're having a conversation. So Power to Change's support with that and has been really key. I think the other thing has been about helping us to be a bit more ambitious, I guess, about what's possible, but also how you can challenge some of the rules and regulations that are holding back. So the sort of work that Power to Change is doing nationally has helped us locally to be able to say, okay, well, that's how we need to operate now, but there's an opportunity to maybe change this if we demonstrate that there's a different way of doing it. So I think that's another way how kind of national funders can support, is that sort of more kind of lobbying and sort of voice around, actually these are the barriers that we see across the country, and then what can we do about those. So I think that's the other one. And then, I mean, the main one for us with Power to Change was, you know, we went through like a bit of a process because we were failing to get an application approved with Power to Change, even though we had a really great relationship with them and they were really supportive of what we were doing. And it kind of came down to the fact that like our financial needs were quite different to what the funding was set up to be able to do. So eventually we secured a large grant, which we can use for two things. So we can use it to purchase a property, so we can act as a cash buyer. So it kind of came from the learning of like missing out on buildings. So we can draw it down at really short notice and use it for deposits and things like that. And if we don't use it for that, we can use it for our core salary costs, which basically stabilised mine and Wendy's life a little bit. So that ability for an organisation like that to kind of learn, actually, those are the things that are stopping this organisation progress, was really amazing. And I think that, you know, that has a real opportunity to get replicated for others as well, because they're probably the main barriers that others face.
Great, thanks, Hannah.
It's okay. Anything else to finish off? We've got 4 minutes, I think. It's been really good to kind of meet such a selection of people, and to kind of really focus in on this issue around local authorities. Anna, is there any reflections that you want to add before we finish?
I think I'm always really interested in hearing about projects that are happening elsewhere, and the kind of challenges that you come across, and how you address those. How, particularly internally, how you kind of raise them up the agenda, with colleagues. So if there are any other kind of thoughts on that, I'd be really interested to know. But equally, I'd be interested to have a one-to-one conversation, just kind of learn from each other's experiences.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I hope you've all found it useful and interesting. Angie, are you about to add something? Thought you were about to say something.
Sorry, I'm Angie. I was just going to say I found a lot of really useful information. I'm just starting off on a steering committee with a new project that we're looking to buy the property, and it's for men in recovering from addiction and Durnford Street. So I found some really useful information. I'm just learning about all this stuff, but thank you very much, everybody.
Brilliant. No, Angie's totally underplaying what they're doing, but it's it's a really amazing project where they're basically shifting a house for people in recovery to community ownership, and they're going to be doing a community share offer, and I think have ambitions to expand as well. Go on.
I think if we get this one off the ground with everything that you've said, like community share offers, and it's all very early stages, but our thinking is then to go for a house for women as well, which is very much needed in the city, for women in recovery, a solid house with a recovery based, good staff, So yeah, I mean, we're looking a little bit further ahead. But it's all going well with the house that we've got in Durnford Street. We've got a good solid steering committee, and we're just pulling it together now. And Hannah's been very good to mentor me. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. They're doing brilliant things, and I think it's just, it's how we amplify and support people that are stepping up through that process is so important, I think, and how Wendy and I talk about, putting the doorstop in the door so other people can follow through. And I think getting more explicit about how we do that in terms of, policies and support that's in the local authority, but also as a wider network and communities is really important. So that each person doesn't have to find their own way, that there's a kind of well-trodden path on how things happen, I think is the real way to start scaling some of this work. Okay, I think we're going to be pulled back in at any moment, hopefully, if it all works. Do put anything else back in the chat if you need to. And thank you for participating. Hope you've had a good conversation.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Yeah, thank you. Great session.